Okay, so this is a repository where you can find the material for the tutorial. So I've posted that in the link in the chat also. So as Christina said, there will be 3 parts, and I will present the first one, part 1, with really just introduction to graphs, how to handle that in Python and NetworkX. For the first half hour, and okay, if you find it maybe a bit boring, don't leave, or at least have a break and come back for part 2 half an hour later for the graph visualization part, which is really awesome, and also, of course, for the part 3, which is on graph neural network. Yes, so we have also, if I can, I don't know if I can show that. Yeah, we have made a Discord channel to ask questions, because of course you can ask questions on the Zoom chat, but sometimes it's not very convenient. And if you close your Zoom, then everything is lost. So if you are familiar with Discord, you can just click on the link and join the channel, or the let's say the server more precisely. You don't, if you haven't used that, you don't need to log in. So you just need to provide a name, and then you will be on the server. So, but this is not mandatory. Okay, if you don't manage what you don't want, that's okay. You can still ask questions on the Zoom chat. So let's start with the first Jupyter notebook. So this is the one. If you clone the repository and run a Jupyter lab or Jupyter notebook in your computer, you will get this kind of page. So you can do it while I'm talking or afterwards also. So it's also not mandatory to have clone the repo and follow with the notebooks. Don't worry if you don't have Python on your computer. So you can do that later on. So I'm guessing most of you are familiar with Jupyter notebooks. So it's like this notebook here, where you can mix text and code. And here for this tutorial on graphs, we'll need just Python, these Jupyter notebooks, plus a few modules that are called pandas, NumPy and NetworkX. And then we'll use some data, some graph data that's coming from this dataset, TU dataset. Yeah, I choose this one because they have some data where you have not one big graph, but many small graphs, and graph neural networks, they are really excel at classifying these small graphs and handling this different size to classify or to also synthesize new small graphs from them. So let's start. So I just run the first line of code, which is just importing the modules. So you see pandas, you know, if you don't know, it's very helpful to read some file on the disk and then make it under a nice table in memory and just have a lot of function for handling these tables. NetworkX is the module, popular module to handle graph, create graph, and make some analysis of graphs, but not neural networks. It's just graph analysis. NumPy, you know, and zip file is just because the dataset is compressed in zip, so I just need that to read it. If you want to know more about this toolbox, you have some tutorial here, given here. And so let's start with the data. So here I just made a summary of what it is, and I will give it, tell it orally. If you want more data, then go to these papers and to this repository. So I've chosen a dataset that is called proteins, which contain this amount of graph, more than 1,000 graphs, small graphs. This is here a picture of it. So I used Jffy and a force layout atlas to plot a part of it. So each color Okay, each small graph is in a different color, and you don't see it very well here because it's too many graphs, but each dot is a node that is connected to its neighbors. And you can have different shapes like elongated ones or like cross or complex structure here. And that will be the data set. And for this data set, what are the nodes? What are the connections? So the node, suppose each small graph is supposed to be a protein. And the nodes are not like really at the level of an atom. It's very higher level. So it's like a structure of the protein that has been identified by biologists. So that are the nodes. You have different kind of nodes, and they are connected if they are a neighbor in space or along the protein chain. So if you have followed the first tutorial, then you must know a lot of things about that now. You must be familiar. So let's load it now, and we'll give more detail as we explore it. Okay, so these lines of code are for loading the data. So you see, I use this module zip file to read this zip file, which is on the repository. So when you go to the dataset repository, then you can download data as zip file, and then just for simplicity, to make it quicker, I just save it in the repository. So it's in the data folder. So now, if I use that, this make me an object called archive, and this object, they have this function open, where I can open the file, the zip file. So you have, in fact, you have several ones here for each line. And when you open it, you uncompress it. Then you can call pandas function read CSV, because it's a text file, but it's a CSV format. And inside it, you have two columns. So source, I call it source and target. So that's, in fact, here for this file, it will give me the edges, the list of edges for all the subgraphs. And I say source and target, but the connection are not directed. It's undirected. Okay, there is no. It's not important if one is connected to 2 or 2 to 1. It's equivalent for this data set. Okay, so that's one file. Then the second file, it's called proteins graph indicator. Here you have again, you have two columns. So you have one column, it's ID of the node, which start from 1, and the ID of the graph it belongs to, the graph indicator, so that you know for each node from which graph it comes from. Because in this data set, you only have one file containing all the small subgraphs. Okay. I added a line here because the nodes, the ID of the node start from 1. And by default, Python, they start from 0. So I have just had to add +1, just that it matches the dataset. You have graph labels. So for each graph, you get one label. If it's an enzyme or not, it's just a binary label. You got also some attributes for nodes. So for each node, which represents a substructure of the protein, you have an attribute which tell you some physical property of this structure. And then you have also node labels for each node. Okay, so I just run it. It's quite fast. Okay, so now it's in memory. And what you have something like this, like you see on the picture. So this is an example of what could be a graph. So it's nodes with an ID, 1, 2, 3, 4, connected together in some way. And then for each node, you have like some features. So it could be a feature vector, then some label. In our case, it's just one single value. The attribute is only one single value. And then you have that for every node. And you could also have, optionally, some feature vector associated to the connection. So F12, for example, for connection between 1 and 2, with a label also, but it's not the case in this tutorial. In this, sorry, in this dataset. Okay. So, and the color are arbitrary, but they could be like you associate a color with a label, for example, and then you have different color. So let's have a look at what contains edges. So you see, it's a Panda data frame. So it's a table where you have an index, then source and target. So node number 12 is connected to number 1, etc. until the end. So you see that you have a lot of edges. Yeah, more than 100,000. Then graph indicator. What is it? So you see, for node 1, it belongs to graph 1, node 2 belongs to graph 1, etc. And then it's ordered increasing in an increasing manner. And you see at the end, you have this last graph is numbered 1,113. Okay. So now, what about the other information? So here, the graph labels. If I just print this graph label object, then it will display this thing. So you see, you have for the first graphs, graph number 1, it's label number 1, and then the last one looks like it's number 2. So, but then you have like 3 dots here. You don't know exactly. So you can call this function, for example, here, unique. So it's a pandas data frame function, and then will give you the list of unique values you can encounter. So here you can have either 1 or 2, and you could also use this function value counts, which is even maybe better here. It gives you what are the label 1, and then how many entries have that label. So you see you have like a sort of more or less balanced data set with 2 classes. And yes, this amount of graph with label 1 and this amount with label 2. Okay. So let's have a look at the node labels. So the same thing, you can display part of the table here. You can also see what are the labels. So here we have 3, 0, 1, 2. And you see that it's the 0 and 1. Okay, they are 50-50, but then the number 2 is really underrepresented here. You have very few of them. So you have to keep that in mind when you do this, the training and etc. And then node attributes, what are there? So you see for node 1, you get this attribute 23.0. So it's a float, sorry. And then if you also ask value counts, then you get much more values here. They are not all represented. What you can see that for some of them, you have a lot of nodes that are associated with this value, 4, for example. And like only one with minus 125. Okay, why not? This is a feature. And well, features are very important for a graph neural network because they are able to combine the graph structure with the feature information to make some classification. Okay, so that's an important part of graph neural network. You have to understand that you have a graph plus data on the nodes or the edges, but here on the nodes. Okay, so this is a few lines just to for those who are not familiar with pandas. You can access edges is like a table, and you can access the cells of the table in different manner. So you can call ilog, for example, where you say row 0 and all the columns. Then it will give you the first row is, if you remember, there's node 12 connected to node 1. Okay, so you could also do that. You say, I want what is inside row 0, colon 0. This is 12, and row 0, colon 1. This is 1 here. Or you can also use loc instead of ilog, and instead of the number the column, you can just say the title of the column. So that will give you 1, because this is the same one here. Target is the second column. Okay, and then you can do many things with these tables. And one example is here. So you want to have the node labels for the node that are in the graph number 1. Okay, so that they have the graph indicator attribute equal to 1. So if I do that, then I get this nice table where you have node 1 and their label and is label 0, etc. until 42, because the first graph is has 42 nodes. Okay, so you get the ID and the label. Okay, I cannot spend too much time, unfortunately, because the tutorial is supposed to be long, 1 hour and a half long. So, but then you can do the exercise yourself afterwards and ask questions on the Discord, because they will be open for a week, and we can also answer questions afterwards if you need. Okay, so now we have loaded the data. Let's build the graph. So now it's the moment where we use NetworkX. So you see here, I will call it graph, okay? And I call the function NetworkX, and X stands for NetworkX, the function graph. So it create an empty graph. And then I have one way to add the edges is by calling the function add edge, and giving a source and a target, and I iterate over the Panda data frame of source and target. So that's one way to do it. But I give you 3 ways. Because then this is, you have different manner to do it. And another one is to to call the function, the networking function, add edges from, and then you give something that you can iterate on, and iterate on this list of edges and create the graph. So that's exactly the same thing as here. So here you see that the manual iteration, and here it's inside at the edges from. Okay, and then you can have either more convenient function that calls networking use from pandas edge list. So you just have to give the pandas data frame here, and then it will construct the graph. So it just takes the list of edges. If the node already exists in the graph, it just connects them. If not, it creates the nodes and then connect the two. Okay, now we have a graph. And then, very important, we have to have a feature on the nodes. So for that, I will convert this node attribute data frame to a dictionary. And then I will iterate over all the feature. Actually, here I've got only one. And I use this networking function, set node attributes. So I give the graph, I need the property, and its value. So here, so you see the key, it's just a node attribute. There is only one attribute. It's a single value, and it's called in the dictionary node attribute. Okay. Let's see what happens. So if I print node number 1 and node number 2, then I got this data. So one has a node attribute 23 and the other one node attribute 10. All right. So that worked. Now I want also to add on the nodes their label and also the graph, the value, the index that gives us graph it belongs to. So exactly the same function, set node attributes, but now with a different data. And now for these two nodes, I got node attributes, label, and graph indicator for each of them. So now the graph is ready to be used for graph machine learning, graph neural networks, or whatever. And okay, this is what you in the picture representing what you get. Okay, node, connection, and features and labels. So there is a small exercise for you later on if you want to work on it. Now let's use some function, some networking function, because networking is not only like a module to build graph. It comes with a lot of tools to analyze your graph, understand your graph. So one is connected, networking, so is connected graph, and then it gives us files, because a connected graph is a graph where you take any two nodes and you can follow a path that connects them. And in our case, it's not the case. We have many small networks that are disconnected. So if two nodes are on different subgraph, then you cannot find a path. So that's why it's false. It's not a connected graph. What you can do with networks when you have like different subgraph disconnected, you can use this function connected components here of networks. And then here, what I do is I take this graph, I ask networks to find all the connected components, the small subgraph, and then make a list of them. And each entry of the list will be a subgraph. So that's done. And now I want to, for example, analyze the first subgraph of the list. So I take S, the list, with ID 0, and I call it GS, for example. And then I call gs.number of nodes, and then that will give me the number of nodes of this subgraph, and it's 42. If you remember previously, we had this first graph with 32 nodes, so that's not surprising. Now, next step. Oh, it's already more than 20 minutes, so I have to hurry up. So just one small visualization for graph that is embedded in the networks and use matplotlib. So you can, so you see, I call networks.draw spectral. So you have different ways of drawing a graph. Spectral is one way. So you see here you have the node. It's not very very nice. Maybe you say to yourself, doesn't look like a nice graph here. So I have colored the nodes according to the node attributes, the label, okay, here with this line of code. And okay, this is one representation. So let's try another one. Let's try draw spring. So spring, you will see in the second part, maybe what it means a bit more. So like spring is like connection are like springs, and React like springs. So when you randomly scatter the nodes, then the force of the spring will organize the network in some way. So yeah, it's a little bit better than this maybe, but not very satisfactory. Okay, so you can also this is also a draw spring, but since the node the position of the node at the beginning are randomly initialized, then each time you run it, you get a different like a visualization. So you see, and here I just didn't change, didn't put the color, but I asked that the labels are drawn on the nodes as values. Okay, that's another way. And now, last part for this notebook is to save the graph with networks write GAXF. This is a convenient format to read, because you will see afterwards when you want to use it in other graph visualization tool, for example, then this can be read easily. So I do that, and then my graph is saved. Okay, so that's all with this first tutorial. Let's jump to the second one. For let's try to make it in 5 minutes. So for this one, I just show you what a few of the functions that networks can be useful for and can provide you. So I need networks, matplotlib, and again pandas. So here, instead of loading a dataset, I just use one that is provided by networks. which is called Barabasi-Albert graph. And this is supposed to be a model of a scale-free network, so a sort of a model for social network kind of graph with a few highly connected nodes and many nodes that are less connected, let's say. So I can specify the number of nodes I want. So n is 200 and a few parameters. So if you want to try also yourself, you can change the graph. Here you see that in the command you have a R-Shreni graph, or you can load the graph that we have just saved before. Okay, so I just do this for the Barabasi-Albert graph. And now I can get a few of the property of the graph. Let's go, let's run it. So these are 3 examples. Page rank, between centrality and degree of the nodes. So page rank, you may be familiar with it. So here you have the node ID, the degree, so the number of connection he has. For example, node C has 44 neighbors, and he has between a centrality of this value and a page rank of this value. And you just to remind you, page rank is like a number or a value that tells you how central or how popular is a node. And how often, if you do a random walk of the graph, how often the walker will end up on this graph. So if you have a graph that have a lot of neighbors, then he has more chance to be visited. And if this graph have like a lot of neighbors, and the neighbors have a lot of neighbors, it's even more chances. Okay, and between centrality deals with it's the same idea. It is with a shortest path, so you have to compute on the graph all the shortest path between every 2 nodes in the graph. And when you take one node, you count the number of shortest paths that are going through this node. And if a lot of them are going through this node, that means this node is quite important for the graph. Could be like you have 2 communities and a node in between, and you have a lot of shortest paths that have to pass through this graph. So that gives you an idea of the importance of the nodes. Okay, you can have also graph properties. So that was node properties. Graph properties, for example, here in the picture, you have the diameter of a graph, which is the length of the path, the longest path between 2 nodes. I mean, the longest, shortest path, okay? So you have a short path, the shortest path between this node and this node is very long because you have to go through all the nodes. You can have also a criteria which is called the average shortest path. So you see on this graph, for example, the number when you compute all the shortest path between all the nodes, then the average will be smaller or much smaller than the diameter, because you have this specific shape where you have a lot like a graph very well connected, and then like some nodes that are far away. So this is important when you analyze a graph prior to training some graph neural network on it, because you see that graph neural network will have to deal with this kind of difficulties, where in some places you have nodes that are very well connected with a lot of neighbors, and other places it's completely different. So yeah, that's something that you have to keep in mind. So for our Barabasi-Albert graph, if I compute the diameter with network X and the average shortest path length, you see you are already made function for that. So you get a 4 for the graph diameter. So 4 hops maximum to reach 2 nodes. And the average is 2.6. Okay. So you have also some criteria of density of the graph. So the density is how many connections you have compared to the maximal number of connections you could have. So when the graph is completely fully connected, everything is connected to everything. So here the density is quite low, 0.04. You could have a look at the average clustering also. And this is counting the number of triangles you have in the graph, and comparing to the maximal number also. So the triangle are interesting because if you take like a social network, for example, if you have two friends, then these friends could be friends together, so that will form a triangle. And that could give you an idea of how connected is the graph. All right. Okay, so there is also other kind of give you an idea of the hierarchy of the graph. I don't want to give detail now. Unfortunately, I won't. I'm running out of time. The degree distribution is interesting. So you have the degree of the nodes here and the number of the nodes that have this degree. So for a small degree here, you have a lot of nodes for this random network we have, and you have a few nodes here that have a very high degree. Okay, and then when you have a scale-free network, this is supposed to be linear in a log-log plot. So you have a logarithm plot here. Okay. Okay, we arrive at the end of this first part. I just save the graph here for maybe later on other analysis. And yeah, so that's all for me. I can give leave the floor for Vladimir.
Cool. Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm super excited to be here. I'm Vlad. I'm a research scientist currently working on graph machine learning at INAIT. It's a startup that uses brain simulations to create next generation AI models. I received a PhD in electrical engineering in 2020 from a PFL. And during my PhD, I worked on graph machine learning algorithms. And while doing my PhD in my everyday life as a research scientist, I have been working with various kinds of graph structured data. So today I'm super excited to share with you some of the graph visualization tips that I've learned like over this time working with graphs. So I think we won't have time for interruptions. So feel free to drop your questions into Discord or like feel free to reach out to me later. I'm going to give you the contact at the end of the presentation. So in this session, I will focus on graph visualization. That should help you in the graph structured data exploration, which will be helpful during the next sessions of this tutorial, and hopefully in the future with your own graph data mining projects. I will start with a general motivation, then I'll give you a brief overview of graph visualization techniques, and finally we will have, if you have time, one hands-on session where I will show you how to create nice visualizations of your graphs and how to publish and share them online without any web development skills, which should be very exciting for you. So let's get started. What will you learn in this like 23 minutes with me? If you ever try to work with Python libraries for network text visualization, like Benjamin just showed you, like when you first try to plot your graph, you get something like this, which is not very interpretable, interactive, like you cannot zoom in, zoom out, like it's pretty difficult to understand what's there. But by the end of this tutorial, you will know how to create something like this that you see on the right, and make an interactive version of your visualization available online. So hope this motivates you enough to stay with me for the next 20 minutes. First, let's see, why do we actually need to visualize networks? So research shows that most information that we acquire from the outside world is visual. And we can process visual information much faster than text. And studies also show that students and learners learn faster and more effectively when they are exposed to a combination of visual content and text rather than just text. So all in all, my message to you here is that if you want to share your ideas with others effectively and efficiently, you need to create powerful visualizations. And I'll tell you more, especially if you work with graph structured data, you should show visualizations of this data because graph visualizations are very powerful. They let you convey complex ideas to very diverse audiences, both in academia and industry. So these are the reasons why Different kinds of visualizations are used across different fields to represent and, more importantly, to communicate important insights to diverse audiences. And today, apart from science communication, we can see them pretty much everywhere in the media online. So graph visualization is just one type of data visualization. However, it covers many interesting use cases. Network structured data can be found in pretty much every domain and field of study. So if you work with any of these data sources and want to convey complex ideas effectively, visualizing your data is a must. Even if we look just at social networks, graph visualizations help to identify importance of users, clusters, influencers in these clusters. Even from just purely from practical point of view, from my experience, initial visualization of graph structured data saved me a lot of time in the future while training GNNs and other related data science projects with graph structured data. So we can distinguish two types of graph visualizations. First, rather traditional one, quantitative. It can either be a distribution of some graph measures, like Benjamin showed, like, for example, degree distribution, or a matrix. The most popular one is adjacency matrix of a graph. The second type is an exploratory graph visualizations, where we're dealing with algorithms that visualize graphs in space and show them explicitly. So in this part, I will only focus on the exploratory graph visualization. In particular, we're going to discuss graph attributes and layout algorithms. So let's start with graph attributes and measures. I will show you how you can gain some information about your graphs just by looking at its attributes. In the following slides, I will show you a few examples. In all examples, I'm going to use the same graph so that you can see the difference of the layout visually. Attributes can give you lots of useful insights about your graphs. So let's start with community attributes. Community detection algorithms allow you to cluster densely connected nodes. You can see this color. You can use this color to color your graph, which improves readability and interpretation. And also it simply makes graph look nicer. So just use it. I usually use it like first. So there are numerous algorithms for community detection in graphs. Today, we will work with the Louvain algorithm, one of the most popular community algorithm detection algorithms. This algorithm is quite efficient, and it can be applied in fairly large graphs. Despite its random initialization, it also provides quite robust results. So after you color your graph with colors corresponding to the data communities, you can change node sizes. You can use local node attributes such as degree, centrality measures, and other related stuff. You can, if you have time series attributes on the nodes, you can also incorporate them into your visualization. So dynamic visualizations are normally more complex and require more effort to create. And we're not going to cover them today, but if you're interested in the links that are shared with this demo, you'll find some examples as well of that. So now let's see how we can display graphs. To display graphs in 2D, we use layout algorithms that use graph connectivity structure or attributes of the nodes to lay out nodes of the graph for better readability and interpretation. So we will start with force-based layouts. There's a class of layouts. There's called force-based. And the first layout algorithm that we're going to look at is force atlas. This Algorithm belongs to family of force-directed layouts. There is a lot of theory, mostly from physics, behind the algorithms. We will not focus on the theoretical part of the layout algorithms. Instead, we will make a quick overview of what you can do with them and how you can use them. So Force Atlas is relatively fast and allows you for good interpretation and readability of the graph. Another relatively fast layout algorithm is named after its creator, Wu. It uses graph coarsening to reduce complexity of the graph and make visualization more readable and less cluttered. The good news is that it stops automatically, whereas you need to define the stopping point in case of Force Atlas layouts. Let's also look at OpenORD. It's another force direct layout. OpenORD reduces complexity of the graph by cutting long edges, and hence it allows for better separation of the clusters. The last but not least force direct layout I'll show you is named after its creators, Futurman and Ricaud. As you can see, it's much slower than the previously presented force-directed layout algorithm, but at the same time, it provides very neat overview of your clusters. So now let's look at two other layouts. These layouts are different from force-directed that we've just seen. They don't use connectivity when computing layouts. Instead, they use attributes of the nodes, the group nodes into clusters. So we'll start with the Circleback layout. Circleback layout is very good for grouping nodes and interacting with them. It's very easy to read and interpret. It looks very neat and clean. And when I need to present something, this is my to-go layout. When you need to study layers of nodes with similar attributes, use 3D network splitter. It allows separating different clusters in different levels for better exploration. So it's also very nice if you need to present something to diverse audiences. So enough theory. Let's see what we can do with our bare hands. Well, almost bare hands. Today we are going to use Jffy. It's a tool that doesn't require any programming skills and allows for very quick analysis of your network. It is constantly being updated with new algorithms and metrics for graphs, and has a fairly great community of where you can find help if you're stuck. So we will use it in the hands-on session, which is coming next, where I will show you how to design your graph visualization. First, we will look into the available layouts. We will see how attributes make our visualization more readable and interpretable. After we've designed our visualization and made it look nice and user-friendly, I will show you how to publish your visualization online in a few clicks, where no coding skills are required, but might be very helpful. You can also find these tutorials, text and videos in the repository of this tutorial. And alternatively, you can find tutorials in the blog. We have a question in the chat, I think. Can everyone hear me well?
Yes, we do.
All right, good, thanks. So if anyone has any questions before we jump into the hands-on session, I will be happy to answer your questions. If you have any, feel free to send them to me. If you have like real quick questions, we can do it right now. But if you need to think, if you need to have time to think about them, just feel free to drop me an email and I'll try to respond as soon as possible. All right, so exciting part. Let's look at what we can do. So usually when you import your graph, in Jffy, you see this kind of black blob over here. And what we'll do next, we will pick a layout. You can install layouts using tools. Don't worry if you cannot follow along with the tutorial. You will have everything recorded in the videos so that you'll be able to follow along. So no worries about it. You can install layouts and other things if you don't have them on your installation through this plugin tab. So for example, here we'll use right away Force Atlas layout. We'll probably scale it a bit and press this to separate clusters a bit more. Now let's reduce the size of the edges and compute that modularity, which is going to give us nice communities. Now we can use these communities to partition the graph to color it actually. So we can pick modularity and you can also recolor it as you like. So let's add more colors to make it more, make it brighter. And here, like there's neat button that lets you save your eyes from burning out on the white screen. So, all right, now we can compute very different attributes of the nodes. So let's start with the degree distribution, but there are many more. So I strongly advise you to explore all of them. And you will see them here. So we'll go to the size of the node and we will change the size of the nodes according to the degree of the nodes. And now you'll see that when we press apply, the degree of the nodes affects the size of the nodes. We will run Force Atlas again, and it'll click this prevent overlap so that the nodes will spread a little bit so that nothing overlaps. And I forgot to tell you what this graph is. It's actually Wikipedia, supported Wikipedia graph that was very active. So it's like graph of trends that happened on Wikipedia, and you can actually see. All right, I will show you right away how to make it more readable. So we'll first reduce the size, and we click on this guy over here, which is text, and we'll rank it as well as degree, so that our degree of the nodes is also nice. Yeah, so here you see the hubs, and now you can actually see that this stuff is about politics. It's Wikipedia pages, actually. Here you see some stuff about movies and YouTube videos and YouTube trends. Here it's probably, yeah, it's about sports. So you can see that this graph actually makes sense. So now we mapped it out. Let's turn off the text for a bit. And actually we can proceed and go ahead and publish it online. I'll show you how to do it. After you install a plugin for exporting into Sigma.js, you can do this, export into Sigma.js template, and you can change an author, you can change the title of the network, add description as you see fit, depending on what you're visualizing. We press OK. I will save it to my desktop so that like you will see. Well, yeah. All right. Now here. Anyway, you'll see it on your desktop. This folder with a bunch of files over here. And if you'd like to visualize it, you can, like locally, you will need to run a simple HTTP server. So we'll do it right away. Network X, network folder, and then and there you go. You will be able to see that over here in localhost. You will see this neat web application that you can interact with the graph with. But right now it's still running locally on my computer, and I cannot share it with you. So what we will do next, we will first stop the server and we go back and we will create GitHub pages with this data so that you'll be able to share it with the world. I have another question in the chat. Okay, problem solved. That's great. We'll create a repo. You can do the same thing on your computer after the tutorial. So we have another 5 minutes. I think we'll handle it. NLDL tutorial, add README. Yes, we create an empty repo. I'm going to clone it. If you don't know how to use Git, there is also a link to Git tutorial in our tutorial repository. So I will clone it on my computer. So there we go. And I will move the folder from my desktop with our visualization to this GitHub repo that I just cloned on my computer. So it's an LDL, yeah. There we go. And now what we need to do, we need to go in first. Make sure that we've copied everything. Yeah, we have everything. And now we can just push everything to Git. Committed everything, and now we will push everything. It works. Cool. So all the data that you've generated through Jffy is supposed to be over here. Yeah, there we go. So it's in the repo that we just created. And what we'll need to do, one last step is to go to settings of this repository and click on GitHub pages and select the branch from which we're going to serve our app. Click save. And that's pretty much it. You can click, you will see this link is going to be like your GitHub username, GitHub.io, and the folder, like name of your repo. So we can go ahead and type network HTML. Right, it's not there because basically what is happening right now, the files from my local Git repo is being transferred to GitHub.io hosting. So it's about like a few megabytes. So we'll need to wait like another 30 seconds. I think, yeah, we still have time. And hopefully nothing breaks in the middle. And as you can see, I specified directly the path in the repo. So if you go to your newly created repository, you will see that you have this file over here, index.html. So I'm specifying directly the path to it, network index.html. All right, let's see. And it is online. So it's great because right now, anyone can access this website. I'm going to send it to the chat and everybody can interact with it right now. And this, like, even basic visualization is very, very, very useful because you can click on different pages. You can explore the graph like that. It gives you so many things. You can search for different clusters, different pages. So it's a very, very, very good base for exploration. And if you have some very, very basic knowledge of web development, you can go ahead and tweak these files, in particular index HTML and JS, like to change the style, to change backgrounds and everything. And yeah, to get your visualization more custom. All right, so that's pretty much all I have.
My name is Filippo, and I will give a quick introduction on graph neural network. So first, some basic concept, and then some example on Google Colab. So first of all, what can we learn on graph? The most common downstream tasks are node classification or node regression, edge classification, edge regression, edge completion, and then we have a set of tasks which involve saying something about the whole graph. So for example, graph classification, graph generation, and the graph summarization. So how can we learn on a graph? Well, what we want to do is to learn a function which takes as input a graph and then returns one or more real numbers in case we're dealing with a regression task, one categorical value if we're doing with classification, or even a whole graph. So this function, of course, can be implemented by using a graph neural network, and graph neural network are mainly composed of two layers. Two types of layers, the message passing layer and the pooling layer. So now we will see briefly what these layers are. So let's start with message passing layers. To explain what a message passing layer is, I will use a specific example of message passing, in particular the one implemented by graph convolution. And to explain what graph convolution are, I will make a simple comparison with the traditional convolution in CNNs that most of you knows probably. So CNNs operate on images. They are composed of convolution and pooling operation to extract feature, and finally there is a classifier usually at the end. And let's focus on the convolution operation. So image convolution basically are performed something like this. So they take an image and the center, they perform a convolution which are centered on some pixel, here depicted in red, and this convolution usually involves some neighborhoods like this depicted with the red squares. So the convolution consists of two operations, a local pixel operation, so direct operation on the center of the pixel in the middle, and then some some operation on neighboring pixels. And then this operation on the neighboring pixel are aggregated and summed together. So how much of the structure of an image do we find in graph? Well, both in images and in graph, we have the concept of locality. So there are neighbors, there are neighboring pixel, and there are neighboring vertices on a graph. However, in a graph, the number of neighbors is not fixed, and then most importantly, the nodes, the vertices of the graph, they don't have any order, and so neither the neighbors. Okay, so we have to take into account these things when designing when performing convolution on a graph. So graph convolution looks something like that. Okay, so we take an input a graph, and then our graph convolution perform a local vertex operation on the red vertex where the graph filter is centered, and then there are some operation on the neighbors. And to identify the neighbors, here we can use the adjacency matrix or some other similar connectivity operator. Okay, so this is the entry Aij of the adjacency matrix. Okay, which tell us which pixels are the neighbors. The important thing to note is that the mixed coefficients that we had before on convolution on images are no longer here. Okay, so this coefficient Cj are no longer here because we say that the number of neighbors is not fixed. There is no ordering, so we cannot use that. Instead, what we have is a coefficient which multiply the whole the result of the whole aggregation. Okay, so that's an important fundamental difference. So This is a visualization which show basically intuitively how the two things are different. So here on the image, we aggregate the content of the neighbors into 1 pixel, and here similarly we neighboring nodes share information with the red node where the graph convolution is centered. By stacking more graph convolution, we can reach farther neighbors on the graph, and this basically translates in increasing the receptive field of the graph convolution. So the graph convolution, which I just discussed, are just a particular way of implementing method passing. In general, there are more advanced way that can be used to exchange information between nodes. For example, one mechanism is to use attention or other particular or other specific ways. Okay, so yeah, so the message passing basically generalized this idea of exchanging information between the nodes on a graph. The second important layers in graph neural network is graph pooling. So the idea of graph pooling is to start from the original graph here on the left and then generate a coarsened graph which somehow summarize the content of the original graph. So in this example, for example, pooling is done by clustering together nodes which are similar and then using a super node to represent the whole cluster. Then we connect the super nodes and we have our coarsened graph. So there are many different ways to implement graph pooling, but all different approach always follow the same 3-step procedure. The first step is to select nodes from the original graph. Then we reduce somehow these selected nodes, which can be also selected with some repetition. You see, so you can define in many different ways this selection. Then you reduce these selected nodes to the super nodes of the coarsened graph, and finally you connect this super node in some way. Okay, so again, many different ways of implementing graph pooling, but all these methods, they share this 3-step procedure. So why do we use why do we want to have graph pooling? Well, because it's very useful for gradually distilling some global information for the graph. Okay, such those which is used in a task as graph classification or graph regression. Okay, so we gradually exchange information and then we summarize the content until we reach, we end up with a single number or single values, categorical values, which represent, for example, the class of a graph. Okay. How can we implement GNNs? Where there are different options, mainly 3 for libraries that you can choose. So DGL is a production-ready tool and support both TensorFlow and PyTorch. On the other hand, PyTorch, geometric, and spectral are more research-oriented, definitely easier to use, and they're also frequently updated with the latest GNN models. Here in this tutorial, I will give you an example of how to implement GNNs using spectral. So spectral is based on TensorFlow and Keras. It has a lot of features and mainly data modes. What are the data modes? Well, here in the bottom, you can see an example of single mode when we have only one graph with the node features associated to it. Then when we have more graphs, we can either use disjoint mode, so still stacking the adjacency matrix in a block matrix using some disjoint union, and then stacking also the node features, or using a traditional batch mode. Notice that when we use batch mode, we need to have all the graph. We must force all the graph to have the same dimension, the same number of nodes. Okay, otherwise things do not work in Keras. This means that we have to do some zero padding. We will see this in an example. Other feature of spectral that is fast, as you will see, is very easy to define a GNN model, and then it comes equipped with loaders for the main, the principal benchmark dataset, the citation network, the QAD dataset, and then also more recent dataset like QM9 and the Open Graph benchmark database. It provides also many utils to create new layers. And here you can find the documentation, the code on GitHub, and then a paper which presents the library. So Spectral comes equipped with many message passing layers already implemented. And then you also have this message passing class, which allows you to quickly implement a new message passing layer where you can define the logic that you want to implement. Okay. Similarly, there are also the principal pooling layers and some global pooling layers and readout layers, which are used usually at the end of your architecture. So let's jump now into the examples. The first example we will go through is semi-supervised node classification. So what is this kind of task? So this is our input. We have a graph where some nodes are labeled and some of them are not labeled. We still have node features, so attributes for this, but we don't know the label. So what we want to do is to assign a label also for these nodes where we don't have the label. So we will use this modular architecture. Here is our input graph. Then we will have a dropout layer. The dropout layer here is particularly useful because since we have only one graph and one set of features, dropout helps us a lot to prevent overfitting while training. Then we will use a message passing layer. In particular, we will use the Jfy convolutions. And the message passing layer will transform our original node features into some new representations. Then we will have, again, the same block, dropout, another message passing layer. And then in the hand, we will have a softmax, which will assign each one of these feature vector associated to each vertices of the graph to the final label. Okay. For this example, we will consider the single mode. Okay, so only one graph and only one set of node feature. Okay, but that's obvious because here we have only one graph. So this is the Colab notebook. You can find this link in the GitHub tutorial, but I can also put it. I can also put it in the chat. So that's the link. And then the Zoom chat, it's a bit, let's see if I can find the Zoom chat. Yes, it's here. So if you want, you can go there. I don't know if you know Google Colab, but basically allows you to just try things by yourself. So you can change things. You can change some hyperparameter. You can train the model. Basically provides you a playground. Okay. So you can just go here and execute with me the cells with the code. So this example, we implement the experiment, the semi-supervised classification from the GCN paper. And as I said, we will use the message passing layer described in the Jfy paper. Okay. So the first thing is we run this cell, we will install Spectral, and then afterward, we will import some libraries, basically just NumPy, TensorFlow, and Spectral stuff. And the next step is to load the data. So this is the data set that we will be looking at, is the famous core data set, which is basically the MNIST of graph neural network. It's a citation network which consists of 2,700 scientific publications, and each one is associated with one of 7 different classes. Okay, so it's a paper from math, physics, and so forth. The citation has 5,400 links, which indicates if one paper is cited in the other, and each node in this graph is a publication, which is described by a vector of 0 and 1s, which basically indicates the presence or the absence of a specific word from dictionary. Here we only consider a small dictionary of 1,430 words. Okay, so there is a vector of size 100 1,400 associated to each node, which basically summarize the content of the paper. Okay, so here we can load the citation. We will use this utils from Spectral. And here we specify which kind of citation network we want to use. Here we will use Core, but there are others. For example, there is PubMed, CiteSeer. You just have to change the string here, okay? And then this is another things which simplify our life, because basically transform it's a preprocessing which it's useful when we use some specific message passing layer. So here we will use the chebconf. So we will basically do some preprocessing which help us to speed up the computation when using chebconfs. Okay, and yeah, the data will be downloaded if you don't have it already on the disk. Okay, so this is just another small preprocessing which basically convert this binary mask to sample weights, which allow us to compute the average loss over the nodes. And notice that this dataset structure that we obtain contains also the mask for the training set, the validation, and the test set. Since we have only one graph, we will use some nodes as training, some as validation, and some other as test. And there is a mask which tell us which nodes belong to which set, okay? Then we can specify the hyperparameters of our neural network. For example, we can specify the number of channels that we have in the message passing layers, the maximum degree of the Chebyshev polynomials that we'll use in our message passing layer, how much dropout, and so on, okay? We will train for 200 epochs, and we can specify a patient of 10, meaning that if our loss does not agree for 10 epochs in a row, we stop training, okay? And here also we can read from our data set that we load, for example, how many nodes there are in the graph, how large, we know that already that this is 2,700. We know we want to know how large our feature vector. We know that is 1,400, and also how many classes. We know that there are 7 in core, okay? But this is just to read it. And then here is the most interesting part, because here is the model definition. And you can see that in Spectral, it's very easy to do that. It's only 20 lines of code, even less. So here, basically, we specify what are our inputs. So we have some input features, and then we have the adjacency matrix. Okay, the input feature, they have F features, and then the adjacency matrix has N nodes. Then we can divide the first layer, which is a dropout layer with this dropout probability, which is 0.5. And then we can define the first message passing layer. Here, as I say, we will be using a Chebyshev convolution. Here we just specify how many channels we want, what is the order of the Chebyshev polynomial, and what kind of activation, and so on, okay? And then that's the second block, which is basically just exactly the same as the first one. But this is something that you can easily change. Okay, so you see that that's basically all our model specification. Actually, it's all our model specification. So very, very compact, very simple to do. It's basically like stacking Lego bricks. Then this code is basically what it does. It basically compiles the model. Okay, so we specify what are
Ganz gut, ich konnte gerade mein Handy nicht.
What are our inputs and what is our output, and also what kind of optimizer we want to use, and so on. Okay, and then finally with model.summary, like in Keras, we just print the summary of our model, and we see that it's a rather small model. There is only for 46,000 trainable parameters. Okay, then we are ready to go. We can just train the model, and we will use this single loader, which are some utils from Spectral, which are used to pass the data. Okay, so as you see, this is very easy and also goes quite fast, because the data set here is quite small. Here we stop after 34 epochs because we have decreased our loss for 10 epochs in a row. Okay, and then on the validation set. And then finally, we can evaluate our performance on the node that we have reserved as test set. Okay. And here we see that we obtain a test accuracy of basically 0.77%. Okay, so as I said, you can just open this notebook and you can play with it and run the code and so on. Then the second, I'm going back to my presentation quickly. The second example is graph classification. So here we have an input graph. We will process with a message passing layer as before, nothing new here, but now we apply some pooling. So here we basically use a pooling which cluster together nodes which are similar and obtain a coarsened graph by using a representative of each class as supernode. Okay, then once obtained this coarsened graph, we apply one additional message passing layer to learn new node features, and then we perform a global pooling, which takes all the nodes that are left and just compress them in a single vector. Finally, we use this vector. We feed this vector to a softmax to obtain the graph class. So this is the link of the second notebook. I can also even this time put it on the chat if I manage. Yes. Somebody asked a question, but I will read it later. Yes, so this is the second example. So in this example, we will implement a GNN for graph classification, and the GNN contains a graph pooling layer, as I said. Okay, and here we will classify the benchmark dataset from the Technical University of Dortmund, the benchmark repository. Okay, that you can find in this link. So once again, we install Spectral in our notebook, and then we import the libraries that we need, which is basically NumPy, TensorFlow, and Spectral. So nothing special. We define the hyperparameters, like basic stuff, like learning rate, number of epochs, and batch size. So batch size, here we will use batch mode. So we will treat graphs as a batch, because now we have many graphs, not just one like in the previous example. Okay, so now we have many graphs and we will process 32 at a time. Okay, and here is where we load our data. So again, Spectral has a loader for all the data TUD data sets. And here we just specify which one we want to use. In this case, we will use proteins, but there are dozens of them that you can use. Okay, there is also an option clean equal true, which means that it automatically removes corrupted labels or duplicate labels, because this data set they have some known issues. So this will clean will take care of it for you. Okay, here we also read some of the parameters of the data set. For example, what is the maximum number of nodes in this data set, what is the dimension of the features, and which is the dimension of the edge features, if any. Okay, and then the dimension of the target, so how many classes there are. Okay, I think here in proteins there are 3 or 4 classes. Then we have to split our data set. This is very standard. We just split in training, validation, and then set. And then we use the batch loader, which is an utility of Spectral, which is used for loading for creating batches which are used to feed our model during training. And notice that here we use an option mask equal true, which basically is zero padding the nodes of the graph. In this way, all the graph has the same number of nodes. This is important because when we use batch mode, Keras cannot process batches where the elements have a different number of nodes. Okay, you probably encountered the same problem when you were using some RNNs or and you need to feed sequences which all have the same length. So this zero padding stuff is quite standard. Okay, so that's what this masking was doing. And then here is where we build our model. So here on purpose, I used a slightly different syntax, where first I declare the layers, and here instead I specify the flow, which is basically the forward pass of the model when it's called. Everything here is pretty standard, except this first layer, which is called graph masking. This is basically taking care of removing or accounting for the nodes which are zero padded. Okay, so we just put this is very convenient, right? Because this zero padding, of course, makes that makes so that there are many nodes which are actually fake. They are just there for making the dimension matches. We just use this graph masking layer in the beginning, and then we can forget about it. Okay, this takes care of telling also all the other subsequent layers that there are some nodes which should not be accounted. Okay, then we will have another type of message passing layer. This is the graph skip. Before we were using the ChebyConv, but that's just a detail. And then we use the graph pooling layer. Here we use the min-cut pool, and here we specify how big have to be the graph, the coarsening graph that we obtain here, particularly specify n divided by 2, where n was the size of the largest graph in the data set. And yes, that's the forward pass. So we just apply, we read our inputs, we apply this masking for the zero padding, then we apply the first convolution, pooling, second convolution, global pooling to just obtain a single vector, and then finally we obtain we apply a dense layer with a softmax in the end. Here there is no softmax because this is done automatically by the loss function. But basically, imagine that there is a softmax here, which give us the class. Okay, so that's it. We just run this code, and then we start fitting the model. This takes a while, so I'm not sure, because this data set is a bit larger, so I'm not sure if we have time to wait for it, but you just train for 10 epochs, and then in the end we evaluate the model. Okay, so we see how well we're doing on the test set. And yeah, you can just run it by yourself, and you see that probably this model is a bit too simple. It's not trained for enough epochs, so we are not reaching great performance, but you can modify the model slightly, maybe using more units, more layers, training for more epochs, and you should get much better results eventually, around 70% accuracy or something like that. And that's it. So I had a question before: if we are only training the network on a classification task, why do we call it semi-supervised instead of supervised? Well, here we are doing basically classification of the nodes, and for some nodes we have the labels. For some nodes we don't have the labels, but for the nodes that we don't have the labels, we still have the feature. So we have basically the data. Okay, that's why it's called semi-supervised. The only thing that we miss is the label. Okay, in a standard classification task, you will not have the featured data points that for testing of the out of sample. You will only have a training set with the labels. Okay, in semi-supervised classification, you also have the data points of the out of sample data that you want to classify. So that's the difference. And I guess I'm done with the time, but yes, if you have question, just send me an email. Here are the details, and there is the Discord channel if you have some questions.